Welcome to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, the clean approach to building your successful business. Now, let's introduce Tom Borg and Dr. Dave Miles. Welcome to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, where we bring you the clean approach to building your successful business. And when I talk about clean, we're not talking about spick and span and dust mops. We're talking about clean. Our podcast is all about clean as an acronym. It's communication, leadership, engagement,
and no drama.
Absolutely, and no drama. So today we're going to conclude a series that we were working on about the 3 proven methods to help your team work better together and by default help to grow your company profits. The first one we talked about was giving respect. It was all about respect. And the second one was praising people in your company on a regular basis. And we gave you a formula on how to do that. If you had no idea and you were just stuck, you could look for it's a TAP, T-A-P. Just remember TAP, things they own, drive, and wear, achievements that they've had, maybe a new degree, promotion, some kind of honors, some kind of reward, or some kind of personal quality trait, their behavior, their trait, a character, something. You can always find something to compliment people on. But the biggest thing was being sincere, giving some kind of specific evidence, and keeping it short so it didn't get creepy, awkward like it sometimes can. So the third one we're going to talk about today is not criticizing your employees or your managers in public. And as we mentioned about all 3 of these, I look at all 3 of these are like, hey, these aren't rocket science. This isn't new material to most managers and leaders. It's simple, but not necessarily easy. And sometimes we could fall into traps. The analogy that I used before was it's kind of like losing weight. If it was just based on knowledge, everybody would be skinny. Everybody knows you just eat less and exercise more and you're going to lose weight. But sometimes just knowing it isn't the same as being able to put it into good use, which I'm hoping that we're going to be able to give you a few practical tips to help you go from that knowledge to application, put it into some good use so you can get some traction out of it and help make your team work better together. So what are your thoughts on never criticizing in public, Tom?
Well, Dave, it reminds me of a situation where I was doing some work with an automobile plant some years back, and in the program, I had the people participating to make a commitment to go out and work with their toughest employees, people that they were having issues with. So one guy in particular came back to me and told me about what had happened out on the plant floor, and it went like this. So one of the people that he knew, one of his fellow employees or supervisors, was doing something that wasn't correct, and his supervisor called him out on it in front of all of his peers. And it went something like this. It said, "Hey, Johnny, what the heck you doing? You screwed up on that line last week." And he started really getting into this guy. Well, what happened is this man he was getting into, Johnny, had a temper. And within a few moments, Johnny had reached down and picked up an iron bar and started to go at this supervisor. Well, people were just aghast when this was all taking place in front of them. Fortunately, one of the other higher up supervisors was in his office, was just outside where this was all taking place, and he just didn't get up out of his office. He just called out. He said, "Hey, Johnny, put that pipe down. Come on in here and let's talk about this." So what the supervisor did then is he was able to diffuse this situation without anything bad happening. So we can see what went wrong there. Obviously, this supervisor had a tendency to criticize his people in front of their peers, was doing what he was used to doing. Well, he picked on the wrong person this time. So here's the point. We don't want people to go around stepping on people when it comes to the way they're trying to help formulate this person's behavior. In other words, if you criticize people in front of their peers, you're asking for trouble. Yeah. That's what we're talking about.
No, I completely understand, because some people, they, like I said, they do have a temper and they don't want to lose face, and you're just embarrassing or shaming them, and a lot of times bullying them right in front of.
That's exactly the
right
word
in front of people. Absolutely. Exactly. And coming from a management perspective, that makes it even worse. It's one thing if it's peer on peer,
Yeah.
But coming from the top down, it's funny listening to your story. My mind just started cranking out the volume, the reams of paperwork that are now being generated by their HR department
Sure.
that multiple people are going to need to sign, because this is just bad in a whole lot of ways. But you're
Oh yeah.
absolutely, but could have easily been avoided.
Fortunately, there was this other supervisor, the higher up, that was able to handle the situation, and they were able to resolve this situation later. But the point is, you don't get a second chance sometimes, and that's what we want to talk about today with our listeners.
Cool. Now, one of the things that we had talked about before was reasons that people don't like to do this, and what are some of the reasons that you found that people are not, why they might actually criticize in public and not look forward to maybe having that difficult conversation out
Doing it,
by themselves the
doing
right
it
way.
the right way. Absolutely. I think some of the excuses I've heard, and I want you to chime in on these. One of the excuses is they don't have time. Now, in other words, we want to just get to the point, get this guy corrected, get this behavior corrected. Tell him I don't care who's in front. He's in front of. Let's get this taken care of right now. So that's one excuse. They don't have the time. Second
Okay.
excuse is, I'll tell you quite frankly, they just don't know how to do it. No one's taught them, or if they've been taught, they haven't remembered how to do it.
Mm.
So those are a couple. What's one you're thinking of?
Well, I just wanted to piggyback off of what you were saying, is that,
Mm-hmm.
especially about not being taught. One of
Mm-hmm.
the things that I know we do in our workshops is when we look at doing behavioral assessments and kind of figuring out your behavioral style and communication style, one of the biggest things that
Mm-hmm.
we harp on, and I say that in a good way, that we really just completely go over and over and over, is the
Mm-hmm.
fact that there is no one good or bad necessarily behavioral style or communication style, but you need to be able to, especially as a manager or especially as a supervisor, you need to be able to adapt to other people, and not just you coming in and barreling out, we need to do this, we need to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Great that the employees understand where you're at, and they understand, okay, that's how Joe is. Joe's the foreman. I
Right.
get it. So it's a little bit, I take less offense from it because I know that that's how he is, but I also know that he's been through some of the same training, and then he knows what he can do to kind of temper that a little bit
That's
and
right.
actually give some tools, tricks and techniques on exactly how to modify and adapt his communication style to that of others, and not just come in and be the driver, the bully, the just here's what we're going to do, blah blah blah, and vomit the
Mm-hmm.
3 bullet points and run out the door.
Mm-hmm.
It's most of the time at a workplace, it's just not conducive to be able to do that, and it lends itself to, a toxic environment,
Oh
HR
yeah.
complaints, turnover. I mean, just the litany of problems goes on and on.
Oh yeah. And
Which
think
is a,
about it, Dave. Dave, think about this. The example that supervisor is setting when they do it the wrong way to his employees. So they're going to pretty much replicate his behavior with each other.
what are you going to
So
do when you become the foreman? You're
yeah,
going to do the same thing.
yeah, or right now, we often say you got to walk your talk. Well, that's a great example of it, because you can tell people that they're supposed to treat each other with respect, but if you don't demonstrate that yourself, then you're showing them, you're instructing them how to do it with each other. So
And
again,
then,
we've got to think of ourselves as a leader.
and when you don't do it,
Hmm.
that employee does bully or really disrespect somebody else, and there's a
Hmm.
problem, and it does end up, like I said, in front of a higher level
Sure.
supervisor or HR. What's the first thing they're going to say? Well, you do it. How are you going to
Mm,
write me up for doing something that you do all the time?
that's
And
right.
you're right, it's hypocritical and doesn't set that good example. And
Hmm.
it all falls back to leadership. You need
Hmm.
to example and model the type of leadership that you want people to follow, like I said,
That's
at
right.
their level and when they go to move up as well.
That's right. So let's talk about some ways to do that.
Sure.
So, what did you have in mind? And I'll
Well,
chime in myself.
one of the things that I've noticed that is probably one of the easiest way to grease the skids on this and to
Hmm.
really kind of I don't want to say hack the system, but people aren't comfortable a lot of times sitting down and having those one-on-one difficult conversations. A lot of
Hmm.
people are. They're just happy. Just blunt, blah, here it is. Boom. In and out, and they're done, and they don't care, they're happy, that's the person that likes to do it, and there's a lot of people that don't.
Hmm.
The easiest way to get around that is nip it in the bud before it happens. So when
Sure.
you bring somebody in and you're onboarding them, brand new hire, you're onboarding them, you kind of got this honeymoon phase, honeymoon period. Everything's great, everything's wonderful. While they're excited to be there, you're excited to have them there. During that time, take a couple of minutes and just let them know that, hey, this is going great now. We're happy you're here. But during your journey here at our company, at our organization, there are going to be some times, not might be some times, there are going to be some times where you and I, as your direct manager, are going to have some difficult conversations. It may be because of a behavior, a lack of behavior. It may be because of performance, maybe a variety of issues. But either
Mm-hmm.
way, just expect it. They're going to be there. It's
Mm-hmm.
not you personally. It's the conversation we have to have.
That's
And
right.
so expect it. So when we come and we're having that kind of difficult conversation, it should be no big deal. Hey, guess what? We talked about this today as we're doing our onboarding, and you can remember back to that. And that, I think, really sets the stage beforehand.
Oh,
So you
yes.
don't have as many issues when, well, wait a minute, now all of a sudden you're being mean and you're being,
Mm-hmm.
the employee looks at it in a negative way versus letting them know this is going to happen. And it's not
So
about you as a person.
what you're doing is saying, hey, here's the rules of the game here. Here's how we're going to handle situations that could come up where you're going to need to get some negative feedback, so they know in advance, hey, this is how we play this game, and then
Yep.
it's not going to blindside them. Mm-hmm.
It's giving them a little bit of underneath of the hood look at the culture of the
Mm-hmm.
organization that most people don't necessarily talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Good.
not the vision, mission, values, culture that's put on the board on how we deal with behavior issues, how we deal with uh, problems of performance, how we deal with those types of things. It is just as much of the culture as the stuff that's on the board,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not something we always talk about. But at least that softens the blow a little bit. So you as a manager or a leader, when you have to bring them in for that,
Mm-hmm.
you've already covered it. It's no big deal. So that
Mm-hmm.
makes you as a manager or a leader much more comfortable with approaching them about this difficult conversation
That's right.
because they already know it's coming at
That's
some point in
exactly
their
right.
career.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Yeah, I think that's the key. I think when you're giving people an understanding of how the system works, so to speak, then they're going to be tuned in and they're going to be aware of that. And of course, we are encouraging our listeners, when you do give that negative feedback, to do it privately. So that
Yes.
allows that person to save face, and at the same time, you can actually have a dialogue with them, so that by the end of that dialogue, you've got a person that is excited and willing to go out there and make those changes and know that they're still a good person and that they're accepted.
Oh, absolutely. Because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things, we don't come into a job knowing everything about it. And a lot of times it does
Mm-hmm.
take some
Yeah.
additional training and coaching to really get up to the performance level that we need to be. And
Mm-hmm.
when you criticize somebody in front of people, and like I said, sometimes it's literally just a habit, it's what you've observed.
Bad.
You may or may not have been taught,
Mm-hmm.
but it makes a more of a bottom line effect a lot of times than you realize because one, you probably when you do that come
Mm-hmm.
off harsher than you truly intend to come across.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Now, maybe you might be the jerk like the guy in the automotive plant that truly is the foreman who's the bully, and he just happened to pick on the wrong guy that day.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
Okay, the guy that was willing to pick up the lead pipe and come after him versus the
Yeah.
people that would cower down and just take it. Not
Yeah.
good, but you come
Right.
off harsher than you intend. The
That's
other
right.
thing is you alienate that person. And
Mm-hmm.
how engaged do you think they're going to be in their work
That's right.
when you alienate them?
Two things to remember here, Dave. One, remember, we want to engage our best employees. That's a practice that'll drive them away
Yeah.
pretty consistently. So that's one good reason not to do that. Second is that too often people won't speak up and call that supervisor out on what they're doing wrong. They just take it,
Yeah.
and to a certain point where they're fed up and they're going to leave. If they're the type of person that says, "Hey, I can do better elsewhere." Remember, one of the main reasons people will leave a job is because of the person they report to. So
Yep.
this
Yep.
is something we're trying to help our listeners with today, so this doesn't
Absolutely.
happen to them. So,
Correct. I mean, John C. Maxwell has talked about this for years. People don't leave organizations, people leave people. And
that's
that
right.
is time and true as you look at different situations, how true that really is.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, there are three parts to that. The one, like I said, you don't want to come across harsher than you typically would intend to. Two, you
Mm-hmm.
end up alienating them, which causes the engagement issues and those type of stuff. Hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
knock on wood, you created an environment where they can, if they can't come to that supervisor, they can go to the next level up, or at least
Mm-hmm.
human resources, or some way they know that there's a safe remedy for them
Mm-hmm.
to go to get that issue addressed that's not going to be involving
Mm-hmm.
retribution afterwards. But the third one, and probably the where the bottom line part of it comes in, you just end up being less effective.
That's right. Absolutely.
And why do something that you know that you're going to come off harsher, you're going to alienate them, you're going to cause
That's right.
potential issues in the workforce, but then you end up going to become why if you're going to be less effective than if you did it the right way.
Absolutely. So let's talk about one of the right ways. There's probably several ways to do this. We're going to share just one particular way. Let's say a person has to give negative feedback to an employee. So what we would like to give it as an example today. Let's say, for instance, you've got an employee that comes to work from time to time, comes to work tardy, right?
Okay.
And however they punch into work, whether it's a time clock they punch into, or they're going to their computer and log in, however it is, you've got to address this issue because other people in the office have noticed, or out on the plant floor noticing it. It's having an effect on their attitudes. You know, they're doing their job, they're there on time, and here you have this one employee that shows up late from time to time. So here's what we're going to suggest our listeners, one approach they can take. So you might want to call this person over and ask that you can meet with them privately, right? You want to keep them out of the public view. Get in your office, close the door, and it might go something like this. You say, Joe, we've noticed over the last couple of weeks that when we were looking at your time records, that it seems that you've been punching in late 3 times over the last 2 weeks. Could you explain what's been happening? I mean, is there something that's not going properly with our system that accounts for people punching in on time, or what? So in other words, you're giving them an opportunity to explain what's going on. And hey, maybe there is some type of a problem where they have punched in on time, but for some reason it didn't get recorded properly. But you're letting them save face, but at the same time, we're giving them an opportunity to explain. All right.
When you
So,
confront them with data, it makes it a little bit more objective. And
yes.
there have been times, and I've worked jobs where this has been the case myself.
Mm-hmm.
You get there and you get there a little bit early, and you just end up talking to somebody. You start working, or you start getting involved in what you need to be doing, and then realize,
oh
crud, I can't clock in until 6 minutes till, or up to 6 minutes after, and I got here 15 minutes early or 20 minutes early. I just ended up kind of getting sucked into everything and started. And then once I realized I hadn't clocked in, I was quarter after. And
that can happen.
That can happen, which is a great reason. I like the ways you just put the data out there and then let them explain it, and you don't attribute a cost to the data. The time record is late because you got here late. It probably did, but what if they didn't? Let them explain the data. I like that. Great point.
Absolutely. So that would be the first thing to keep in mind. Second, okay, so let's say they explained it well. I've just been getting late. I had some problems, my car or family issues, whatever. So what we want to do is we got to resolve this issue, right? So we'll have that dialogue with them and say, well, Joe, obviously it's important that you come here on time because we have other people in the plant. They're counting on you to be here at your position. They can't cover for you. They start to get a little resentful because they're here and they're covering for you, and then that creates problems. So what I'm wondering out loud now, how can we figure this out? How can we prevent this from happening in the future? So put it back on their lap. Ask them for a solution. What can they do to make sure that they get to work on time like they're supposed to and fulfill their obligations that they've committed to when they took on the job at your organization? So give them a chance to help be part of that solution. This way it helps them become a co-author of what needs to get done. And again, remember we talked about this where people don't argue with their own data. So,
correct. It gives them that ownership in the solution that they're like, well, my boss is just telling me to do this. No, you're the one that made the suggestion. The boss just happened to agree.
That's right.
It would have been the same thing that the boss would have said, but because it came out of your mouth, like you said, people don't argue with their own data.
That's right. So I guess the next thing I would suggest then is that you follow up with this person. You check back to see how they're doing with the coming in on time. And if you see that they're coming in on time, praise them.
Yeah.
Praise them. Remember we talked about praise pays. So when you see the behavior you want, like Ken Blanchard says, catch them doing something right
Reinforce
and
the good behavior.
reinforce that good behavior. And now you're going to see a better chance of modifying this person's behavior so that they're able to fulfill their obligations as an employee in your organization. So that's what we're going to say. There are other ways to do it, I'm sure, but I think this is one of the best ways I've seen has worked with the clients I've worked with and when they've been working with their individual employees with issues like that.
No, I would agree with that 100%. And I wanted to go just a little bit deeper into something that wasn't as black and white as the time card issue.
Sure.
Maybe behavioral problems that may be cropping up. One of the things I just recently talked about in a workshop is we were reviewing everybody's behavioral assessments.
Sure.
And one of the things that we looked at was we went through as a team and we were looking at this and we're like, here's how this person would appear under just to themselves. This is how they see themselves. And everyone's like, oh yeah. They're looking at their individual assessments and they're like, yeah, that's right on the money. That's exactly kind of the way I see myself. Cool. It flips the script and said, here's how other people see you or could see you under two conditions. If you think that this is the way I am and people see me the way that I intended under normal circumstances, great. The first condition that was a little off was how people may perceive you when you're under moderate levels of stress. Behavioral style or communication style may manifest itself this way when you're under a moderate amount of stress.
Yeah, what would be an example of that? They're not the same person.
Oh, like for example, somebody that may be very outgoing, maybe very talkative, just a very people person, fast paced, might get to the point where they feel, wow, they're really just a little bit more self promoting, and maybe they're coming across as a little gib and kind of not serious as they really would.
Sure, maybe they're a little bit more outspoken or a little bit more impatient.
Possibly. And then the other one that was really telling was the fact that you looked at it and it was like, okay, here's some things where people may perceive you under an extreme amount of stress. When you're under a lot of stress, you might come across as really pushy or really self-promoting or really just, like I said, just not serious at all. Whatever. There's a lot of examples.
Arrogant.
Right. We will go, and I want to go into a few of those, like these are the way you can look at the examples and see this in another podcast. But one of the things that I really stressed in this workshop was the fact that what do we typically do? We see what we look at bad behavior and we go directly to address the bad behavior. And that's fine, and we should. But if you know, and you have this kind of cheat sheet here with these assessment tools that, wow, okay, so-and-so is this type, more or less this behavioral style. The next piece of it is I know that people with this behavioral style tend to come across as this when they're under either a moderate or extreme amount of stress.
That's right.
Joe, who's this behavioral style, is showing these behaviors. Instead of jumping at the behaviors, why don't I go just a little bit deeper, pull Joe into the office and say, what's going on? How things going at home? Is there anything going on at work? Not even talk about the behavior yet. Go for the deeper issue on what's causing the stress. And if it's the stress that is causing the behavior, if we could deal with the moderate or extreme amount of stress in their life and confront that's causing the behavior, you're going to get a lot further, a lot quicker than just putting a Band-Aid on the symptom and not treating the cause.
Exactly. That's a great way of looking at it. And in a sense, that's what we're asking our listeners to do with their employees is be a coach of sorts. And that is be able to dive a little deep with what's going on in that person's life to kind of help them uncover what the causes are here and together resolve that issue.
Right. And a lot of the things we talk about, we have talked about in other podcasts and that we're going to talk about in some future podcasts, all kind of fit together in this in a holistic form. Like, for example, if you're doing performance evaluations once a year, and that's the only time you ever meet with that person. It's kind of hard to do what you just said. Where if you're meeting with them on a regular basis, maybe once a month, or something short, something informal, every couple of weeks, just check in.
Which
Hey,
we
how are things
recommend that
going?
they do. This is what we recommend.
Absolutely, and there's some major companies that are starting to. It's like turning the aircraft carrier, but they're starting to make that cultural shift on. We need to start getting away from the formal yearly evaluations, and even if they do, it layer it as okay. We're implementing the check-ins along the way, so that way when you do get to the big formal one, it's not a surprise. You already know what's coming.
That's right.
But absolutely, you can't know that about the person if you don't regularly check in with them. You only see them once a year, or you have 100 direct reports, or that you never get a chance to spend any time with. The other part of it that is a little bit of a fast forward, a little bit of a hack, a little bit of a peek behind the hood, peek underneath the hood, is having your organization bring somebody in and look at doing a few behavioral assessments and really getting an idea of what if you don't do them in the onboarding, get an idea of where, not just what everybody's behavioral or communication style is, what drives them or motivates them. Look at, okay, I've got the information, now what?
What can you do with it?
What do I do with it? Then that's the real power of having the training, the workshops, that type of thing. When you can say, okay, now that I have this information, I'm armed with this. I know what my people are. I know on a one-on-one basis as a team that we work together. But what do I do with that information as a manager or leader? How can I make, just like the example, this person, Joe, is exhibiting these types of behaviors. Let me go back and look. I remember going over this in workshops. These are some of the same behaviors that match what he is. That tends to make sure that it manifests itself when he's under stress.
That's right. And this is something.
Let me deep dive that.
And they can do this on an ongoing basis with the help of those tools. And as a result, they've got a real opportunity to help change that person's behavior in a positive way. So that makes great sense, Dave.
Well, and the biggest thing for me is two parts to that I really enjoy, and then we'll wrap this up. One of the things I really stress is that when a lot of people look at different behavioral assessments and such, they really look at, or they imply, this type may be better than that type, or a fast pace may be better than a slow pace, or a task oriented may be better than a people, or whatever the system. When you really look at it, two things that really strike me kind of deep and I really push hard in our workshops is the fact that, one, there is no good or bad style. There is no one better than the other, and you truly need a good representation on your team. It doesn't have to be exactly I got 10 people in, or I got 16 people in 8 slots and I have 2 people in exactly every slot. It doesn't have to be like that, but you have to have a good representative distribution around there, and you need to figure out, if you don't and you have gaps that you identify, that's fine. Can I hire in those gaps, or how do I make those gaps less obvious? How do I fill in for those gaps?
How do you help your people adapt?
Exactly. I don't have that. And then you're really looking at, when you get armed with that knowledge, you're really appreciating the differences of others instead of just tolerating the differences of others.
Good point.
And
well said.
And it makes you think just a little bit different. It gives you that pause, like Marshall Goldsmith talks about in the book Triggers, where the difference between what happens to you, you have that, if you can build in that, just that half a second of pause to, ooh, wait a minute. And you can think about what the trigger is, or what happened, or then you can figure out, okay, now I can do something different. It's not just an automatic reaction, and I can meet them where they're at, adapt my communication style to theirs and vice versa, and I can actually communicate with them on their level. Something that they relate to and they can internalize, and actually be much more effective.
Oh yeah, that's building a good, positive culture when you go at it from that approach, where you're really creating the kind of culture that you want by helping people understand themselves better and understand each other better, and how to adapt to the whole situation. Yeah, correct. Well said, Dave.
And the nice part is, when in the internalization of that, is just that you, bottom line, have to care about the people that you work with and that work
That's right.
underneath of you, and that you're there as a leader and a manager to serve them because they're the ones producing the product, serving the customer, the forward facing. So it goes into a lot of the same topics that we talk about, but it's
Mm-hmm.
crucially important. And the more you can be kind of armed with these tools and really, but have that sincerity of heart that you really truly want to
Yep.
do right
And
by
that's
them,
something we can
makes all
talk
the
about
difference in the world.
on future podcasts. So,
Absolutely. Well, we've
okay.
talked about the 3 proven methods in this series to help your team work better together, and hopefully for business owners and CEOs and managers, by default, grow your company's profits because your teams are working better together. So thank you for listening to this series. We would love to hear your comments. Send them, put them down below. Make sure and subscribe if you're looking at this on YouTube or iTunes or your podcast of choice. Please subscribe, give some comments, rate us any feedback. We'd love to find out what we can do better and some topics that you might be interested in
Mm-hmm.
as far
Well,
as
no.
business prosperity that we could try to cover in some of these podcasts. So
That's
thank you
right.
very much for listening, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.